So the news yesterday, September 12th, 2025, it dropped something pretty significant, didn't it?
Yeah, it really did. The U.S. urging G7 and EU allies to hit countries like India and China with steep tariffs.
Right, because they're still buying Russian oil, basically working around the Western sanctions.
Exactly. And what's really interesting, I think, is that this isn't just about Ukraine. Not really.
Okay.
Well, it feels like this move, pushing our allies harder, it really exposes some depth issues, fault lines maybe,
Yeah,
in America's whole foreign policy approach.
especially around energy security and economic influence.
Precisely. It highlights this clash we're seeing more and more, where these big global alliances bump up against what each country sees as its own vital interest. Sometimes that's going to clash with our interests.
It definitely makes you think, and it sparks this almost counterintuitive question for our deep dive today.
Which is?
What if America's constant search, this decades-long quest for global energy dominance, what if it's actually made us less secure and maybe drained our treasury along the way?
That's a big question. It challenges a core assumption, really.
Yeah. So today we're diving deep into that tangled web U.S. energy foreign policy, how chasing resources led to some very expensive interventions.
And how this shifting world stage is really testing America's traditional power and economic strength.
We'll try to unpack decades of decisions, Cold War stuff, post-9/11 wars, look at the real costs.
And ask, what does it mean for America when other major powers just increasingly do their own thing?
Okay, let's start unpacking this. American foreign policy and energy, they've been tied together for a long, long time.
Absolutely. It's fundamental.
If you just think back, the big conflicts, 1991 Gulf War, Afghanistan in 2001, Iraq 2003.
All happen in oil-producing regions. Or, critically, areas needed to transport that energy.
Yeah, these weren't just random spots on the map. These wars directly hit regions supplying oil we needed. It paints a pretty clear picture of priorities, doesn't it?
It does. And linking that to the economy, you have to talk about the petrodollar system.
Right. Explain that a bit.
Well, basically, since World War II ended, the U.S. dollar has been the main currency for buying and selling oil internationally.
And that wasn't just by chance.
No, not at all. It was really locked in by a deal with Saudi Arabia back in 1974-75.
Okay. And the effect?
It created this massive global demand for U.S. dollars. Everyone needed them to buy oil. That became a huge source of American economic power, real leverage.
And there's a controversial angle here, too, isn't there? Regarding Iraq.
Yeah, this is where it gets, provocative. Some analysts point to November 2000. Saddam Hussein decided Iraq would start accepting euros, not dollars, for its oil.
A direct challenge to the petrodollar.
Exactly. And some argue that move, that specific decision, was actually a big factor behind the U.S. invasion later on, that it was partly about protecting that petrodollar system, protecting America's financial dominance.
So how does that connect to this idea some historians talk about, the open door policy?
Well, it suggests a kind of continuity, right? The argument is that U.S. policy, especially on oil, has often just been corporate capitalism in action, meaning using government power, even military power, to make sure American businesses have access to markets, access to resources like oil.
You saw that with Bush Sr. and Clinton.
Yeah, both administrations pursued what some call global open-door imperialism, using force or influence to support U.S. economic interests in key spots, the Persian Gulf, Asia-Pacific. It's a very pragmatic view of national interest, maybe a cold one.
Which then raises the obvious question. What about democracy? America talks a lot about promoting democracy.
Right, and that leads to what people call the democracy conundrum, this tension.
Between ideals and reality.
Kind of, between wanting to promote democracy and needing stable access to resources, especially oil from the Middle East.
So the fear was that pushing for democracy might destabilize friendly regimes, the ones who supplied the oil.
Exactly. If those regimes fell, what happens to the oil flow? That flow is seen as vital to the U.S. economy. So often the practical choice was to, keep the status quo, maintain stability, even if it meant backing regimes that weren't democratic.
It prioritized the oil flow over democratic ideals in that region.
Often, yes. It's like constantly patching an old leaky roof far away because you need shelter right now.
Yeah.
Instead of investing properly to build a solid new house back home, the immediate need often won out.
Okay, so given this deep reliance and the, let's face it, enormous costs of securing foreign oil, you'd think diversification would have been priority number one. And successful by now.
You would think so. And the U.S. certainly tried. We had NAFTA aimed at North American energy cooperation, investments in the Caspian Sea region, Latin America, Africa. But despite all that, projections still showed the Middle East supplying, somewhere between 54% and 67% of the world's oil by 2020.
So still absolutely vital.
Still vital. That goal of real energy independence, or even just significantly lessening dependence on the Middle East, it just remained out of reach. It makes you ask why those efforts didn't quite get us there.
And speaking of those efforts, it's interesting to look at the Bush W administration. They had deep ties to the energy industry, right?
Oh, absolutely. George W. Bush himself, a former oil man. He started Arbusto, his first energy company, way back in '77.
And Dick Cheney.
Vice President Cheney, yeah. Strong oil sector background. He headed the administration's energy task force.
I remember reading a Newsweek quote from back then. Something like...
Yeah, not since the rise of the railroads more than a century ago has an industry placed so many foot soldiers at the top of the new administration. That was in 2001.
That's quite a statement, and it led to some criticism.
Definitely. Some critics, like Paul Krugman, argued the administration basically manufactured an energy crisis narrative in 2001.
Fabricated. Why?
The argument was it was tailored to the industry's measures. Basically, create a sense of crisis to push policies that benefited the energy industry.
Okay, so that's the backdrop. Industry influence, diversification struggles.
Yeah.
And then comes the invasion of Iraq.
Yeah.
And the reasons given were, well, they seemed to shift, didn't they?
They were incredibly varied, often contradictory, actually.
What were some of the justifications put forward?
Everything from securing oil supplies to military strategy, like pushing the National Missile Defense System, the shield against missiles.
Right, projecting strengths.
Yeah. And also this really ambitious idea of reshaping the whole Middle East, making it more pro-American, supposedly to secure Israel and help fight terrorism.
Underneath all that, there was oil.
Well, a top-secret document from February 2001 surfaced later. It apparently showed a melding, that's the word used, of policy reviews towards rogue states like Iraq, and plans for capturing new and existing oil and gas fields.
So energy was woven in right from the start, explicitly.
It strongly suggests that, yes, the energy angle seems to have been part of the national security thinking very early on.
Which brings us back to the cost. Did the Iraq intervention pay off? For the American taxpayer, I mean.
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? You had Paul Wolfowitz famously testifying in March 2003.
Saying Iraqi oil would pay for it all.
Pretty much. He said there was a lot of money to pay for this reconstruction, and it wouldn't be U.S. taxpayer money.
And the
reality. The Iraq War ended up costing the U.S. economy at least $3 trillion. Maybe more. It massively increased the national debt.
And ironically,
it actually made the U.S. more dependent on Saudi Arabia to keep oil markets stable. So the exact opposite of self-sufficiency.
The promise of Iraqi oil funding reconstruction just evaporated.
Completely. American taxpayers footed that $3 trillion bill, and we ended up more reliant elsewhere. It's a stark example of how trying to secure resources through intervention can backfire spectacularly, leading to less security, more debt.
And the instability it created.
Huge instability. There was famously no Phase 4 plan for what happens after the invasion, just chaos, which led to the rise or resurgence of groups like al-Qaeda.
And wasn't there something about legal immunity for oil companies?
Yes, Executive Order 13303. It gave oil contractors basically lifelong immunity from lawsuits in the U.S. related to their work with Iraqi oil.
Lifelong immunity.
That's what it said. One analyst called it proof of the true motivation, claiming it was about absolute power for U.S. interests in Iraqi oil. Companies could operate without legal risk, the promised Iraqi money never materialized for reconstruction, and taxpayers paid.
Wow, so Iraq costs trillions, increases debt, makes us more dependent, fuels instability. A clear example of that core question we started with, does the pursuit of dominance sometimes lead to less security?
It certainly looks that way in this case.
Okay, so if that's the past, costly interventions, promises falling short. How are we doing now? Let's look at the recent Russia sanctions. How effective have they actually been?
Well, after the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, the West hit Russia with massive sanctions. The initial forecasts were grim for Russia. The IMF predicted, an 8.5% drop in GDP? Huge inflation.
Yeah, over 21% inflation predicted for 2022.
But the actual numbers, Russia's GDP only fell 2.1% in 2022, and the prediction for 2023 was a fall of just 0.7%.
Which is pretty much in line with many Western countries.
Exactly. Far, far better than anyone predicted. It really makes you question the real bite of those sanctions.
So why didn't they hit harder? What's the explanation?
Well, you could call it the hole in the wall. Basically, other countries stepped in.
Like China. India.
Yes, China, India, Turkey, the UAE. They largely ignored the sanctions. They kept supplying Russia with goods it needed, and crucially, they kept buying Russian oil.
The numbers must be significant.
They are. China-Russia trade surged up over 75% in early 2023, hit nearly $94 billion.
Wow.
And India even started paying for Russian oil in Chinese yuan. Think about that directly bypassing the US dollar, another knock against the petrodollar system.
And it wasn't just non-Western countries finding workarounds.
No, even within Europe.
Yeah.
Only about 8% of EU companies with Russian subsidiaries actually pulled out completely. Unilever, the Dutch giant, actually doubled its profits in Russia in 2022. Doubled. And big energy players like Shell from the UK, Mitsui and Mitsubishi from Japan, they still hold significant stakes, double-digit stakes, in Russian oil and gas projects.
And there were unintended consequences too, right? For other nations.
Definitely. The head of the African Union pointed out that banning Russian banks from SWIFT, the global payment system, really hurt African nations. They couldn't easily pay for Russian food and fertilizer they depended on. It shows the collateral damage these broad sanctions can have.
So sanctions didn't cripple Russia as expected. Other major players ignored them. Even some Western companies stayed. It really points to something bigger, doesn't it?
It absolutely suggests a major shift, a profound shift in global power dynamics.
Economists like Nouriel Roubini have talked about this.
Yeah, Roubini argued pretty bluntly that the decline of the American empire has started. He cited things like the excessive reliance on hard military power in Iraq and Afghanistan, and of course the rise of rivals like the BRIC nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China.
It's not just military or geopolitical, though. It's financial, too.
Critically financial. The U.S. national debt, our current account deficits. Who's financing them? Increasingly, it's strategic rivals like Russia and China, or unstable petrostates like Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states.
So the countries we might disagree with or even try to sanction are also our bankers.
In a way, yes, it creates what's been called a balance of financial terror. How effectively can you pressure a nation that holds trillions of your debt?
Yeah.
How freely can you act when your economic health is so tangled up with theirs, it's a major constraint.
It really puts those tariffs we talked about at the start in a different light.
Yeah.
How do you impose steep tariffs when you're financially intertwined like that?
It's a huge challenge, a real strategic bind.
So, given this reality-shifting power, financial entanglement, what's the American response? How are we adapting?
Well, you see different approaches. Donald Trump's policies, for instance, with a heavy focus on tariffs, that's a clear attempt to reshape the global economic order by prioritizing America's national interest.
Trying to change the rules of trade, currency.
Exactly, pushing for structural changes. You see think tanks like the American Compass arguing that tariffs aren't enough on their own. They say you need them accompanied by capital controls.
Capital controls. What does that mean, basically?
It means government restrictions on money flowing in and out of the country. The idea is to force companies to reinvest that money back into American manufacturing, not send it overseas. It's a very clear America First economic strategy.
A more protectionist stance.
Yeah, described by some as aggressive unilateralism, trying to act alone to protect national interests. It reflects the position, perhaps, of a superpower feeling its dominance wane, trying to hold on to its position in a tougher world.
We've definitely covered a lot of ground today, from the long history and high costs of chasing foreign energy
to the somewhat limited impact of recent sanctions and this undeniable shift in global power.
It really seems like the old playbook, the easy answers, they just don't apply anymore. Many countries are clearly looking out for, number one, pursuing their own interests.
And sometimes that directly conflicts with ours, which makes our own choices even more critical.
It feels like America's top economic spot has been chipped away at by costly wars, by maybe some questionable fiscal policies.
And this reliance on foreign money, the challenges to the dollar, it all creates a really tricky environment for U.S. foreign policy going forward. It's perilous, complex.
So it leaves us with a big thought for you, the listener. In a world where maybe those global economic connections feel more like a risk than a benefit, what would really make America secure and self-reliant?
But without completely abandoning our role in global stability, is this renewed focus on domestic strength, on national interest, the only way?
Or does that path risk more isolation? In a world that's already feeling pretty fractured, does it actually undermine the stability we're trying to achieve?
Something to definitely mull over as you watch things unfold.